Here is a question for you. Cast your mind back to the 1950s, not the chrome-draped American dream machines you see at concours events in California, but the real, honest, everyday cars that sat in the driveways of Bradford and Bristol, Coventry and Cardiff. The cars that took families to the seaside on bank holidays, that started most of the time on cold Monday mornings, and that were nursed back to life with a borrowed spanner and a dog-eared Haynes manual. Britain in 1950 was a country still pulling itself up by its bootstraps. Rationing of some goods did not finally end until 1954. Petrol was cheap, but wages were modest. And yet, against that backdrop of post-war austerity and cautious optimism, the British motor industry was producing more exported cars than any other nation on earth. By 1950, the United Kingdom was supplying 52% of the world's exported automobiles. Let that sink in for a moment. Families who had never owned a car before were now, for the first time, within reach of one. The question was not which Ferrari to buy, it was whether the family budget could stretch to a Morris, a Hillman, or perhaps a Ford Popular. These were not glamorous choices, but they were real ones. Millions of them. Today, we are counting down the 7 best-selling and most beloved British family cars of the 1950s, the cars that shaped a generation of drivers and left tire tracks on the history of motoring. Some of these you will know intimately, others may surprise you. And the number 1? We think it might just bring back a memory or two. Stay with us. This is the real story of motoring Britain, not the showroom fantasy, but the road-stained truth. Car number 7, the Rover P4, auntie to a nation. We begin our countdown at number 7 with a car that never tried to be flashy and never needed to be, the Rover P4. If you were a bank manager, a solicitor, or a general practitioner in 1953, you drove a Rover P4. Not because you were told to, but because nothing else on a British road communicated quiet, serious respectability quite so effectively. It was nicknamed Auntie by the motoring press, a name that stuck for decades. Solid, dependable, slightly conservative, but crucially, never letting you down. The P4 entered production in 1949 and remained in the Rover catalogue all the way to 1964, a remarkable run of 15 years. Over that span, Rover offered it with a range of engines starting with a 60 horsepower, 2-litre inline-6, and eventually stretching to a 2.6-litre unit, producing 104 horsepower in its later years. Each variant carried the same upright, purposeful stance that made it instantly recognizable on any road in Britain. The original Rover 75, the first of the P4 family, carried a curious single headlamp mounted centrally in the grille, giving rise to its early nickname Cyclops. That lamp disappeared in 1952, replaced by a more conventional twin headlamp arrangement. But the car's dignified character never wavered. What you paid for was build quality that outlasted almost everything else in its price bracket, a ride that absorbed the worst of Britain's post-war road surfaces with composure, and an interior that smelled of leather and solidity. The Rover P4 was never the fastest, never the cheapest, and never the most exported British car of the 1950s. But it was, without question, the most trusted by the professional class that formed the backbone of British civic life. For that reason alone, it earns its place on this list. Car number 6, the Vauxhall, Velox, and Cresta, a touch of Detroit, in Luton. If the Rover P4 was a tweed jacket, the Vauxhall Velox and Cresta were a brill-creamed quiff, unapologetically influenced by what was rolling off the lines in Detroit, but made right there, in Luton, Bedfordshire. General Motors had owned Vauxhall since 1925, and by the mid-1950s, that transatlantic DNA was on full display. The PA, Velox and Cresta, introduced in 1957, brought sweeping fins, broad chrome grilles, and two-tone paintwork to British roads for a price that a travelling salesman or a confident factory foreman could actually afford. The Velox carried a 2.26-litre, 6-cylinder engine, producing approximately 69 horsepower. The Cresta was mechanically identical, but added a richer interior, more chrome, better upholstery, and that signature two-tone paintwork that made your neighbors pause on their way to the corner shop. Together, the Velox and Cresta sold more than 300,000 units across their production run, from 1948 to 1965. These were not modest numbers. In an era when the national average wage was under £10 a week, a new PA Cresta sat at around £750, serious money, but attainable for those with ambition and a hire purchase agreement. The Velox and Cresta had one well-documented Achilles heel: rust. British roads, British weather, and the steel of the era conspired to turn many examples into oxide dust well before their time. Finding a solid survivor today is a genuine achievement, and Concours examples command attention at any British classic show. But in their day, these cars were aspirational in a way that very few British vehicles managed. They said, "I am going places." They said it loudly, and in two colors. Car number 5, the standard Vanguard, Britain's export champion. Here is a car that most people outside of a certain age bracket have almost completely forgotten, and that is a genuine injustice. The standard Vanguard was, for several years in the early 1950s, one of the most important cars Britain produced. Not because of its performance or its beauty, but because of what it represented: a calculated, determined attempt to rebuild Britain's industrial export machine after the devastation of the war. The Standard Motor Company of Coventry launched the Vanguard in 1947 with a deliberate strategy: build one model, build it well, and sell it to the world. The Vanguard used a 2.088-litre, four-cylinder engine producing 68 horsepower, mounted in a body that was influenced by the contemporary American style, but sized for narrower British and European roads. The government of the day required that car manufacturers export a substantial percentage of their production in exchange for steel allocations. The Standard Company took that requirement seriously. Vanguard sold into markets as diverse as Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, and across continental Europe. In 1954, the Vanguard achieved something no other British production car had done before. It became the first British car offered with a diesel engine as a factory option. That diesel variant, using a four-cylinder unit, developed in conjunction with Standard's Ferguson tractor division, was aimed squarely at high-mileage commercial users and proved genuinely popular in export markets. The Vanguard was revised through Phase 1, Phase 2, and eventually the Phase 3 in 1955, each time refining the body and interior while retaining the proven drivetrain. It was never a driver's car. It was a workhorse, dependable, practical, and utterly representative of what Britain was trying to do in those difficult, determined post-war years. Car number 4, the Hillman Minx, the Middle England motor car. If you were to design a car specifically for the aspirations and anxieties of 1950s Middle England, comfortable but not showy, modern but not startling, affordable but not cheap, you would arrive somewhere very close to the Hillman Minx. The Minx had been a Roots Group staple since 1931, but it was the 1950s versions, the Marks 5 through 8, that represented the model at its most polished and most popular. These cars offered a 1.39-litre four-cylinder engine, a 4-speed gearbox, and enough interior space for 2 adults in front and 2 in the rear with genuine comfort. The ride was well damped, the steering was light, and the construction was solid enough that many examples gave their owners 10 years of reliable service. What made the Hillman Minx especially shrewd from a commercial standpoint was the Roots Group's strategy of rebadging the same basic platform under multiple names: Humber, Singer, and Sunbeam variants all shared Minx underpinnings. This allowed Roots to address different market segments with a single development investment. The Singer Gazelle offered a more refined interior. The Sunbeam Rapier added sporting pretensions. But underneath, they were all Minx. The Minx was also available as a convertible, a proper factory drophead, not a coach-built special, and in the warmer summers of the decade, this was the car you might see parked at a seaside resort in Devon or Kent, hood folded neatly, the family making the most of a rare fine afternoon. The Hillman Minx never dominated headlines, never broke records, and never stirred the soul. That was never its purpose. Its purpose was to serve the family reliably, year after year, in a country still finding its post-war footing. At that, it excelled. Car number 3, the Ford Popular, Britain's most affordable set of wheels. Let us be honest about what the Ford Popular was. It was not a sophisticated automobile. It was not a comfortable one, in any luxury sense of that word. It did not come with a heater as standard. The speedometer was not illuminated. Even a sun visor cost you extra. And yet when it launched in 1953 at a price of £390, the Ford Popular was the cheapest new car money could buy anywhere in Britain, full stop. For a skilled factory worker, earning perhaps £12 a week, £390 represented roughly 30 weeks of gross wages. That was within reach, particularly with the hire purchase schemes that Ford and its dealers had made widely available. The Popular put private motoring within the grasp of a class of British worker that had never before sat in a car they owned. The mechanical specification was, to put it charitably, utilitarian. The Popular 103E used a side-valve, 1.172-litre four-cylinder engine, producing 30 horsepower, a unit whose design ancestry went back to the 1930s. The 3-speed gearbox was operated by a column-mounted lever. Performance was modest, a top speed of around 68 miles per hour, achieved with some patience. What the Popular offered in exchange for those compromises was simplicity and repairability. A competent amateur mechanic, and in 1953 Britain, there were a great many of those could maintain a Popular with basic tools and a modest budget. Parts were cheap, garages knew the engine intimately, and the cars proved remarkably durable in everyday use. The 103E Popular remained in production until 1959, when it was finally replaced by the more modern 100E variant. By then, it had served its purpose. It had put Britain on wheels. For that achievement alone, it deserves its place on any list of the era's most significant cars. Car number 2, the Ford Anglia, a nation's everyday companion. Now we arrive at number 2, and here is where things get interesting, because the Ford Anglia of the 1950s was not a single car. It was an evolution, and the jump between its two major forms within the decade was more dramatic than many people remember. The Anglia 100E, introduced in 1953, gave Britain a genuinely modern small family car at an accessible price. Where the Popular had retained pre-war engineering, the 100E brought an entirely new body, lower, wider, with a proper full-width structure and a new overhead valve engine displacing 1.172 litres and producing 36 horsepower. That may not sound like much today, but against the Popular's side valve unit, it felt like a revelation to drivers of the time. The 100E Anglia found its way into hundreds of thousands of British driveways across the mid-1950s. Reliable, economical, and just modern-looking enough to feel like progress, it was the car of the young couple, the small tradesman, the growing family, on a careful budget. More than 1 million Anglias of various generations were produced across the model's full production life. Then, in 1959, right at the close of the decade, Ford introduced the Anglia 105E, and jaws dropped. The reverse rake rear window was a styling decision that divided opinion immediately and has never stopped doing so. Borrowed, in spirit, from American practice, it gave the 105E a look unlike anything else on a British road. Under the bonnet sat an entirely new overhead valve engine, a 1-litre unit producing 39 horsepower that would go on to power Lotus and other sporting applications for years to come. Two very different cars sharing one famous name, both genuinely important to the story of 1950s British motoring. The Anglia, in both its forms, earned its place in the driveways and the hearts of a generation. Car number 1, the Morris Minor, Britain's beloved. And here we are, the number 1. Did you guess it? The Morris Minor. Of course it was. There are cars that sell well. There are cars that are well engineered. There are cars that become part of the cultural fabric of a nation. The Morris Minor, and particularly the Minor 1000, that arrived in 1956, managed to be all three simultaneously. For an audience that stretched from working-class families in Sheffield to country doctors in Somerset to famously the royal household itself. The Miner was the creation of Sir Alec Isigonis, the same engineering mind that would later give the world the original Mini. The car had launched in 1948, powered by an 803 cubic centimeter engine producing 27.5 horsepower. When the Miner 1000 arrived in 1956, it brought a 948 cubic centimeter unit and a proper two-piece windscreen to replace the earlier split-screen design. These were meaningful improvements, and the public responded. What made the Miner so significant beyond its sales figures was the breadth of its appeal. It was available as a two-door saloon, a four-door saloon, a convertible the Tourer, and the incomparable Traveller, with its structural ash-wood frame and split rear tailgate. That Traveller variant became one of the most distinctive and recognizable vehicles in the history of British motoring. It was practical, it was charming, and it was quintessentially English, in a way that resists rational explanation. In 1961, just past the end of our decade, but built on the foundation of the 50s Miner's success, the Morris Miner became the first British car ever to pass the 1 million units produced milestone. The occasion was marked with a limited production run of 1,000 examples finished in a distinctive lilac, which Isigonis himself reportedly disliked intensely. They sold immediately. Original purchase prices for a Miner, 1,000 inches, 1956, sat at approximately £631 for the two-door saloon, not the cheapest car available, but competitive, and substantially more car for the money than its less sophisticated rivals. Today, well-preserved examples, particularly the Traveller and the Tourer, are among the most collectible and sought-after of all British classics. The Morris Miner was not just the best-selling British family car of the 1950s. It was, in many ways, the car that defined what a British family car should be: honest, dependable, cleverly engineered without arrogance, and somehow always managing to look as though it was pleased to see you. 7 cars, 7 different visions of what British motoring could and should be in the age of post-war reconstruction. From the stripped-back honesty of the Ford Popular to the chrome-draped ambition of the Vauxhall Cresta, from the professional solidity of the Rover P4 to the enduring charm of our number one, the Morris Miner, these vehicles collectively tell the story of a nation getting back on its feet, one family at a time. What strikes you, when you step back and look at all 7 together, is the sheer variety of intention. There was no single British family car of the 1950s. There was a rich, complicated ecosystem of machines built for different budgets, different aspirations, and different lives. The factory worker in Manchester had different needs from the solicitor in Surrey, and the British motor industry, for all its eventual difficulties, understood that. These were not perfect cars. The Popular had no heater, the Vanguard rusted, the Velox and Cresta dissolved in damp weather. The Miner's early engines were modest to a fault. But these imperfections are part of the story, a story that belongs to the people who drove them, maintained them, argued with them on cold mornings, and eventually passed them on to sons and daughters who still remember the smell of the interior. Now we want to hear from you. Did you own one of these? Did your father or grandfather drive a Miner, an Anglia, a Hillman Minx? Was there a Rover P4 in the family that seemed to last forever? Tell us in the comments below. These are your stories as much as ours, and we genuinely want to hear them. If you have enjoyed this journey through Britain's motoring past, please consider subscribing to the channel. It costs you nothing, and it helps us keep making the kind of content that respects your knowledge and your experience. A like on this video goes a long way, and sharing it with a fellow enthusiast is the greatest compliment you can give. Thank you genuinely for watching. You are the audience that makes this worthwhile. People who live this history, who remember it not as nostalgia, but as lived experience. We will see you on the next one.